welcome to the quiet part of mind time. The no one's here yet, so I'm just kind of chatting with myself. Let's see, just putting link into chat. There we go. Perfect. Perfect. Hey, Laz G. Welcome. So nice to see you today. Hello, Huli. Huli, are you purring for any particular reason? Or is it just a general kind of sound? Just felt like purring. Some more purring. Is that what you want? More hi, happy Thursday, guys. I hope you've had a good Thursday so far. Mine was okay. Right at the end of the day, I had to talk to an upset parent, which that's never fun, talking to people who are upset. It's part of my job that I do not much enjoy, but it's necessary. It sounded like you were purring. I guess I need to purr back. When was I rolling my R's? I don't even remember doing it. Not in purring mode. I'm in screaming mode. My brain does not cooperate. Oh, Laws. I'm sorry your brain is in scream mode. That always sucks. Hey, Ebony. Hey, Hiwa. Welcome, guys. Yeah, a parent. But I mean, like, the problem that her student was having was her fault. Not the student's fault, the parent's fault. The parent had gone into the student's account and registered her for a class without the student knowing. But then she never dropped the class because the student didn't know she was registered, so she didn't drop the class. And the parent just assumed that it would drop because she didn't pay for it. So she was like, well, why didn't it drop when we didn't make the payment? Every other semester it drops classes if we don't make payments. And I was like, first of all, this is on you, boo. Like, you did this. You registered your student for a class that she did not want and then never told her about it. So the reason you're on the hook for the payment for this class is because you registered for it. So, but anyway, she tried to make it sound like it was our fault for not dropping her from the class. It's like, no, this is fully your fault. But that's what people do. People make mistakes and then they try to not take responsibility for them. Yeah, who knows? Who knows what the parent was thinking? I mean, it didn't mess up her GPA because she withdrew from the class, so it just ended up being a withdraw instead of her getting a letter grade. But it did mess up her bill. I don't know. I don't know what she was thinking, but anyway, she got to talk to the dean, the assistant dean of student services, about it instead of me. So it was out of my hands at that point. Yes, I have juice. I have grapefruit juice. I don't know how you guys feel about grapefruits. Surely you know how I feel, considering that the literal title of this channel is Pink Grapefruit 22. But yes, have some juice, my loves. It's delicious. We love juice. So we finished this week's update. They do not like your medication. Oh, laws. I feel like we've talked about that before. Alas, grapefruits are good. Yeah. Huli, what word do you use for grapefruit? And Hiwa, what word do you use for grapefruit? Please tell us in Spanish what word you say for grapefruit. Huli, you say pomelo. Okay. That's what I assumed. I assumed you would say pomelo because that's what I remember from when I was in South America. Pomelo rosado, pink grapefruit. That's me. I'm the pomelo rosado. It is laws. Toronja. Okay. That's what I figured you would say toronja, but I didn't want to assume. We've got a pomelo from El Cono del Sur, and we've got a toronja from Mexico. Got it. Pum. Sounds like one of the words for apple. Like pum. I would not be surprised if those words were from the same like Latin root word, pum and pomelo. Yes, laws. Pomelo has gotten the name pomelo has gotten adopted into English as the name for a completely different fruit. Yes. Pomelo, I'm the pomelo rosado sounds sexual. Is that what you meant, Huli? Put grapefruit on Google to see the fruit. I was about to say uva. Yeah, well, Hiwa, it's not your fault that the English has a weird name. I don't know why they're called grapefruits. They have nothing to do with uvas. But some English speaker back there decided that fruit needs to be called grapefruit. Right. Grapes are uvas in Spanish. English does like to make things confusing. We really do. We really, really do. I feel like I got sidetracked. We were talking about Bookworm, right? So what are we guys feeling? Would you like me to reread either of the chapters from this week? Since we only got to hear each of them once. I know sometimes you guys like to hear the chapters again to like really digest what's happening. Or would you like me to go back and reread a different part of the story or read something else? Does anyone have an opinion? Grapefruit equals thing like orange and lime together. Yeah, kind of. I think of grapefruits as being more like oranges and lemons mixed together. Kind of. At least eggplants can look like eggs sometimes. Yes, the original eggplants were white, so they did actually look like eggs. Yes, Huli, you're so disrespectful. Ugh. Laws does not mind. Oh, yes, Ebony, we do need to read Wilfried's trial for Huli. Leave rereads for when Nemo is here. Okay. The secret pool thing gathering again. Oh, you mean the goddess's bath? That part? I mean, I can read that part again sometime too. But yeah, I think it would be good to reread the trial for Huli. I just need to locate that book. Let's see. Do I still have it open here somewhere? I do. Yes. Cool. Now, if it will just let me click on the chapter that I want to go to. Come on, Kindle Cloud Reader. You know you want to let me read this book. Haha, there we go. We did read it for Huli, Ebony, but we can always read it again. There is nothing. Let Rhys click. Okay, Huli, understood. Let's go. Let's read. This chapter is titled My First Ever Little Sister. Oh, kitty in box. Nice. Upon returning to Ehrenfest, I retrieved the small chalices from the blue priests who'd traveled during the harvest festival, also receiving reports on the harvests and conditions in their respective provinces. I would need to collate these reports together in preparation for a meeting with the Archduke at the castle. And once this is done, we can get to work making my Jureve. Let's do this! Ferdinand and I arrived together at the castle, then went our separate ways, with me going to the northern building with Richarda. After you've delivered today's report to Ab Ehrenfest, milady, you are due to greet Lady Charlotte. Lady Charlotte? That would be Wilfried's little sister, correct? Yes. Her baptism ceremony is this winter, so a room and the like are being prepared for her as we speak. Now that Richarda mentioned it, Elvira had actively ensured that my room in the northern building was ready for me to use right after my baptism ceremony. I hadn't exactly been in any position to help her with that, given that I was partway through having a noble upbringing hurriedly beaten into me at the time. But Charlotte was apparently learning to lead people by taking charge in how her room was arranged. You know, it sounds like she's a lot more competent than Wilfried. I considered that possibility as I entered the northern building and climbed the stairs. The door to the room beside mine was wide open, and I could see furniture being carried inside. A short girl, about my size, was observing the process. She must have heard us come up the stairs as she immediately whirled around. Her dress fluttered and her blonde, almost silver hair swept through the air behind her. Her face was so adorable that I could have mistaken her for a life-size doll, and her lively indigo eyes blinked rapidly. When we locked gazes, she broke into a happy smile and immediately began walking over, her retainers following along with her. Rosamine, big sister. Ah, she just called me big sister. I was immediately overcome with emotion. Hearing that phrase from such a cute little girl with a big smile on her face was enough for me to embrace the idea entirely. I was Charlotte's older sister, and that was that. Oh, yeah. So, the castle has like a main building, which is where the Archduke and his first wife live. And then the northern building is where their baptized children, so children like who have been baptized already live. So they live in like this building separate from their parents. So children who are younger than baptism age live in the main building with their mother. So like if Sylvester had a second and or third wife, they would have their own separate residences, like separate from the main building and separate from the northern building, and their pre-baptism children would live with them like in a separate building. Mine is weak to blondes. Perhaps. I haven't had my baptism ceremony yet, so I can't give an actual blessing, but may I give you a traditional greeting anyway? Yes, of course. Charlotte glanced up as she tried to remember the words of the prayer, then knelt and lowered her head. May I pray for a blessing in appreciation of this serendipitous meeting ordained by the fruitful days of Shutzeria, the goddess of wind? You may. May Shutzeria, the goddess of wind, bless you. I am Charlotte, the daughter of Ab Ehrenfest. I pray that the threads of our fates be woven together. Although Charlotte couldn't give actual blessings yet, she had the words memorized and recited them flawlessly. I knew all too well how nerve-wracking it was to give that kind of greeting for the first time. Back when I had given one to Elvira, I was so worried about messing up that my heart had started pounding. As Charlotte knelt, I tried to roughly echo what Elvira had said to me in response. I pray the same, Charlotte. I am your older sister. She looked up at me with a relieved smile, and I couldn't help but smile back. Because it's at their baptism ceremony that children first get given the ring that lets them use their mana. Mine got a ring before her baptism because, she had already been baptized as a commoner, and it was just more convenient for her to be able to use her mana occasionally. But they pretended that she only got it for the first time at her noble baptism ceremony. And now we have some art. So here's our first view of Charlotte, little baby Charlotte, right before her baptism. So she's 6, almost 7 at this point. And then here's mine greeting her. And you can see on the inside, she's losing it. And then Richard is looking on fondly oh, look at these darling children. Yeah, art of the baby. Mine doesn't do anything the normal way. That is very correct, Laws. You know your greetings very well, I said. I thank you ever so much. All of my other siblings are boys, and I've always wanted an older sister. I'm just so happy to see you. Me too. I've always wanted a little sister. I pray once again for our fates to be woven together. Holy cow, Charlotte's super cute. She might even join Thule in my pantheon of angels. An emotional sigh escaped me, at which point Charlotte tilted her head slightly. Dear sister, you're the High Bishop, aren't you? Will you be giving me a blessing at my baptism ceremony? She asked, her indigo eyes brimming with hope. I knew that look. She was giving me puppy dog eyes. So blessed. It's her first time begging me with puppy dog eyes. Oh yes, I must grant her wish no matter what. It's my duty as her big sister. Oh, my cute little sister, I would love nothing more. So long as Ferdinand permits it, I shall bless your baptism as your older sister. I'm quite looking forward to it, she said with a beaming smile. I gave a firm nod in response, and that was when Richarda took a step forward. Milady, it is about time for you to deliver your report. Would you like to hold a tea party when you return? Lady Charlotte certainly does love sweets. The very thought was wonderful beyond words. I turned to Charlotte and saw that she was wearing the same smile that Wilfried always wore when presented with sweets. There was, of course, no denying that it looked much cuter on her. Yee, tea party. I believe I would. We can hold a tea party at fifth bell when my report is complete. Ottilie, please instruct Ella to prepare sweets. As you wish. After promising to hold a tea party with Charlotte, I sped to my room and got changed, then hastily made my way to the Archduke's office by high beast, Viharda urging me on all the while. Yeah, get wrecked, Vilfried. When we arrived, Ferdinand was already there, and the scholars were all ready. Sylvester straightened his back and looked at me. Now then, your report? Charlotte is positively adorable, I said, starting with what I considered the most important point of discussion. Indeed, she certainly is, he replied with a nod. I have promised to perform her baptism for her. This is not what you're here for, fool, Ferdinand barked, completing the comedy trifecta. Give your report on the Harvest Festival. Out of respect for his righteous observation, I started giving my serious report. Every city in the Central District had produced a greater yield than last year, except, of course, Hesse, which was recognized as the result of my going everywhere for spring prayer. Seems like I'll want you to do the same next spring, too, Sylvester said. In all honesty, I found it really taxing to travel that much in such a short space of time, but that wouldn't be an issue since I would have a healthy body by then. I nodded to show that I was fine with his suggestion. Sylvester nodded in turn. Everyone but Karstedt, Ferdinand, and Rosamine, clear the room. My plan had been to swiftly return to my room once my report was done, but it seemed this conversation wasn't over just yet. I sadly drooped my head, thinking about how much I would have rather been drinking tea with my cute little sister than talking with these three. Once the last scholars in attendance were out, Sylvester cracked his neck and stretched, going from Archduke mode to Sylvester mode. So, Rosamine, these two told me about your mana compression method, and I was wondering whether it works on adults, too. Does it let people fit more mana into their bodies even after their vessel for mana stops growing? I don't know, since I'm still a child, but it's very possible. Perhaps you should experiment, I suggested, which made Sylvester lean across the table with shining eyes. He was positively overflowing with eagerness to try it out himself. All right, he said, we'll select individuals to learn it based on those who meet the criteria. That is, already knowing how to compress traditionally, belonging to the Florencia faction, and having the permission of the 6 of us. How about we start with your guardians and family? Seems like a good idea to me. Sylvester, Florencia, Ferdinand, and Karstedt apparently all counted as my family here, and I got the impression that this would soon be expanding to our guard knights and attendants as well. Given how Sylvester was speaking like this was something that had already been decided, I could guess that he'd settled on it in his head and was enthusiastically visualizing the results. If this does work for adults as well, then I might need to rethink how much I charge. I had been thinking of the cost as something like a children's education fee. But if my method worked on adults as well, then it would be applicable to a lot more people than I'd thought. This would in turn put a strain on people's family budgets, and I certainly didn't want to earn anybody's ire. We needed a perfect price that was accessible to everyone while still remaining a considerable expense. Perhaps we could have the fee for subsequent family members after the first purchase? Otherwise, buying the method for 5 people would prove expensive even for an archnoble. Right, Father? Karstedt stroked his mustache. That would certainly be a big help, he said. I'd specifically asked him because his family was the largest out of all those participating here. Rosamine, getting more mana is extremely important to nobles. I want to spread news of this compression method during winter socializing, so the sooner we test it out, the better. What do you say? Sylvester asked, now leaning completely over the table. He wasn't the only one either. It looked like Karstedt and Ferdinand were both leaning forward a little too. But despite their eagerness, preparing magic contracts for everyone would take some significant time. I promised to have a tea party with Charlotte today, and preparing the magic contracts for everyone would surely take quite some time. We can do this some other day. Ugh. Rosamine, you're going to prioritize Charlotte over me? Your adoptive father? Yes, she's much cuter than you are, I replied frankly. Fair point. I'm one hot guy, sure, but not as cute as her, he confessed with a groan, resting his head in his hands. I certainly had some thoughts on him calling himself hot, but I ultimately decided to keep them to myself. Plus, I care more about my potion being made than spreading my mana compression method, I added. I'll teach you all about it once my Jareve is ready. Yes, Laws, humble too. I mean, let's face it, Sylvester is hot, and he knows it. How else did he convince Florencia to marry him? Ferdinand narrowed his eyes slightly in thought. Oh, sorry, I skipped over a paragraph. Despite us having gathered all the ingredients, we hadn't actually made the potion yet, since Ferdinand had told me to wait until after my report was done. I cared a lot more about finally getting healthy than other people having more mana. Ferdinand narrowed his eyes slightly in thought. Rosamine, we can make the potion now, but you will want to wait before using it. Why is that? The process of using a Jareve puts one to sleep for days, months, or at times even an entire season. You would do well not to use it if you wish to attend Charlotte's baptism ceremony. In a shocking twist, my mana clumps had formed so long ago that it would take a significant amount of time for them to melt. Our software, you Laws, I do not understand what you mean by that, but it sounds like you had a very important epiphany there. Yes, Ebony, perhaps even years. End user license agreement. Oh, wow. You're right, Laws. That is basically what they are. Terms of service. Let's see. Furthermore, Ferdinand continued, although you said that you would perform the winter baptism ceremony yourself, there is much you will need to learn to make that possible. It will be much more complicated than the lower city's baptism ceremony. You will need to learn the blessing, the mana registration process, and the sequence of events leading up to the debut. That will not leave time to use the potion, no matter how much you wish to be healthy. I want to make the potion so that I can be healthy and have the strength for this kind of thing. But I have to push myself even more before I can use it? This is terrible. But at the same time, I couldn't suddenly break my first promise to Charlotte. She would forever lose trust in me as her older sister. I wanted to be there for her baptism ceremony, no matter what, even if that meant putting off using my Jareve. Very well, then I shall use the potion after Charlotte's baptism ceremony. No, because winter socializing begins after the baptism ceremony, and so too does the dedication ritual. Considering that we wish to keep your circumstances hidden from other nobles, it would be best to wait until spring prayer is over. Hold on a second. You really intend to make me wait another half a year before I can be healthy? I want to be healthy now, I protested, but Ferdinand shook his head. We must not be hasty and misjudge the proper timing for using the potion, he said. But it honestly felt as though he was only pressuring me because he wanted to lessen his own burden. I was willing to postpone being healthy for Charlotte's sake, but I wasn't about to wait until spring for Ferdinand. Grrr. If you want to delay me getting healthy for your own selfish reasons, I won't teach any of you the manic compression method until then. I'm going to become a normal girl and you can't stop me. Ferdinand frowned and tapped a finger against his temple, then widened his eyes in realization. Rosamine, what if you were to attend the winter baptism ceremony, not as the High Bishop, but as her older sister? That would remove the need to learn all the processes at such short notice. That's not an option. I'm going to bless Charlotte as her older sister. I don't mind having a lot to learn in the slightest. I've spent years learning all sorts of things under time constraints. There was no doubt in my mind that I would be granting the first request ever given to me by my darling little sister. Thule always did her best to do whatever I asked, and I wanted to be as great of an older sister to Charlotte as Thule was to me. I understand. You wish to play the part of a good older sister for your first little sister, correct? Ferdinand asked, still tapping his temple. I gave a big nod. That was exactly right. I wanted to show Charlotte my best side and become an older sister who she could respect. These men thinking they're as important as her little baby sister. Exactly. Who do they think they are? In that case, would she not respect you even more if you performed not just the blessings at her baptism ceremony, but dedicated yourself to the duchy at the dedication ritual and spring prayer too? Do you not think that is what a member of the archducal family should do? I do, I agreed, clenching my fists with fiery determination. Ferdinand nodded, a smug look on his face. Then work hard until spring prayer is complete. Right! Wait, what? I tilted my head in confusion, but before I could even process what had just happened, Sylvester pointed at the door. Rosamine, isn't it about time for your tea party? You can go now. I can? Yep. Show my Charlotte lots of love. Of course, I beamed, confidently tapping a fist against my chest before saying the traditional farewells. I then exited Sylvester's office, humming all the way back to my room. At last, my tea party with Charlotte. Cha-la-la-la-la, cha-la-la-la-la. Yeah, Ebony, he got her. He totally got her. Huli, do you have to go? I can keep reading if you don't have to go yet, but... No! Huli! Okay. Well, I'm glad you could come for a little while. I'll miss you, Huli. Poro, 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 poro. Poro, 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 poro. Poro, poro. But seriously, have a good class and a good evening. Oh, I miss you. Bye-bye. Okay. Bye-bye. Take care. See you. Bye. Love you. Oh my goodness, it got really dark in here. Nobody told me it was this dark. I think that you did? I missed it. You're too busy listening. Okay. Till right then, yeah. I think it's getting cloudy outside because there's storm clouds rolling in because it's the rainy season here in Florida. But you can just enjoy this like sort of chiaroscuro thing that I have going on with like only half of my face lit. Maybe I'm Two-Face from Batman. The side of my face is like horribly disfigured from a terrible accident. Um, that's probably what's going on, right? Or the fandom of the opera. You're right. The fandom of the opera is there inside your mind. Yeah, I really appreciate what autocorrect did there. So, guys, since I was reading that chapter for Huli, I will not continue reading it now that Huli is gone. Would you like me to read something else to you instead? Or would you like to just call it a night there? Thoughts, opinions, emotions? Read. Laws say read. So I could read some more Bookworm. Heaven knows there's plenty of it. I could read. Oh no. Sorry, it's my student. I'm guessing she's saying that she can't meet with me after all. Guys, let me let you in on a little secret. I've not had a tutoring session with her since before I went to Texas. Because she keeps canceling. But I mean, we've already, like, by the time I hear from her that she can't do it, like, it's already past Caracol time. So it's not like we can suddenly do Caracol. But aww. She's like, I've been so excited for so many weeks. I keep thinking of things I want us to study. But she can't make it. I feel sad. Don't have anything to offer, but you don't want to leave. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. See, it's okay. I'm excited to get back to our lessons too, whenever we can. That sounds like fun. Okay. Well, let me see if there are any more good chapters of my thesis to read. We haven't done that in a while, right? I don't know. Maybe it would be fun to, like, shake things up a little bit, do a little something different. Ooh, yes. The Rhys's thesis. Let me read you. Yeah, I can do that one. Oh, and plus, since the pages are white, it's like making my face visible again. Great. Thanks, Reflected Light. Yeah. I can read Rear View Mirror Perspective. Everyone buckle in. Yes, light shining on. For Rear View Mirror Perspective, Chapter 6. Hold on, let me just reply to her text real fast. Oh, she's asking me a question. Okay, I'll reply to that later. Oh, Ebony's strapped, guys. Rear view mirror perspective. I am 5 years old. It is winter, February of 1991. My neighbor from the next trailer over, Evangelina, and I are playing in my backyard, her front yard, with the nutcracker ornament that was a recent Christmas gift from my mother. We're marching the little man, whose bright red uniform clearly marks him as a soldier, up and down small dirt hills, through dense grass forests, and over treacherous ant mountains. Our careless enjoyment is leaving scuff marks on his shiny plastic skin and chipping away his cheap paint job, but our child's eyes see only excitement and adventure. I know in the back of my mind that today is a different sort of day. My mother has told me before I skipped off outside to play that I must be ready to come back inside at a moment's notice. A champagne-colored car, a strange car I do not recognize, rolls up and pulls into my family's parking space. I know I must go back inside now. I tell Evangelina, but she wants to know why. It's my dad, I say. She seems confused. He comes to visit sometimes, I offer as further explanation. Then I'm off and running to our front door, ready to greet this stranger who means the world to me. I don't know it on that day, and I won't remember it until years later, but this visit is different from the others. This time, my father has come back to stay. When my father first came to Texas in 1979, he had a foreign wife, a 1-month-old daughter, a 6th-grade education, and almost no English. He had the kind of broad, dark-skinned face that screamed his otherness among the gringos. Tall, with a soccer player's lithe body, his hair black, curly, and kinky, his nostrils wide, his skin like varnished mahogany. A Texan could tell within minutes that he hailed from south of the border. Inevitably, he encountered a certain racial slur. They called him wetback. Yet his back was not wet from the Rio Grande's water. He'd come on an airplane. He'd come from his native Honduras to live in the city where his wife, my mother, had grown up. They lived with my mother's parents. My dad tried to hold down a steady job, but it soon became apparent that my mother would have to return to her teaching if they were to survive. It was shameful for him, El Macho, to let her, La Hembra, take charge of the family, but it had to be done. He found other ways to occupy his time. He learned to drive standard from his father-in-law. He watched Sesame Street with his baby daughter to master the same simple English she was learning. He played soccer with Mexican expatriates to remind himself of home. As so many do, he found solace in a bottle. People often ask me why Spanish is not my native language when it is my father's. It's easy enough to explain. He simply wasn't there to teach it to me. I was born when my sister was 5.5 years old. By the time I was 2, he was gone. My mother says that I cried a lot when he left. I would ask for him, wonder where he'd gone. I imagine her, the abandoned wife, listening to her toddler crying for her missing father. Did she call him and tell him, "Sarah keeps asking for you"? Did she cry with me? Or did she set her mouth in a straight, hard line and try to forget the man who scorned her? I remember my excitement as a 5-year-old, knowing that the mysterious man called Daddy was going to pay us a visit. My memory can summon the emotion of longing to see him in those moments, but there's no answering emotion today. Do I scoff at the ignorant child or envy her? Do I pity her for the disillusionment life has prepared for her? I remember myself as a child, but I cannot feel a connection to that person. I watch her from an aching distance. I watch her like a third person narrator who knows only too much of the plot the author has planned out for the hapless little girl. There are snatches of memories of my father from those earlier years. He has just returned from a soccer game, one eye circled by black bruises and bloodshot from the impact of a fist. We wake one morning to find him passed out on the front lawn next to a puddle of his own vomit. During a brief flirtation with vandalism, I carve his name on a wooden bookshelf in the living room, and he takes the blame for it. He creates an ingenious little pinball soccer game for me using a board, some nails, and some string. He's angry with me, and I cower in my room while he goes to get his belt. In most of my memories from those years, though, he is absent. Christmases, birthdays, school events, Sunday mornings at church. I see the smiling faces of my mother, my sister, my aunt, my grandmother, but not my father. Where was he when all of these things were happening? I once expressed to my mother the wish that I could have had a brother. I thought that having grown up with a boy would help me understand them. She answered, God knew what he was doing when he only gave me daughters. What she meant was that a boy who grew up with the kind of father I had would have been doomed to be a problem child. We girls, though, were much better able to weather being abandoned and neglected by the male parent. Boys need a male role model to look up to. Girls only need mothers. I used to believe, when I was younger and had the luxury of more extreme viewpoints, that men have no hearts. I was never able to develop an exhaustive definition of this conviction, and I never could find a better way of expressing it. But I knew, in the knowledge of my own heart, after all, this was a heart kind of knowing, not a brain kind of knowing, that men do not have hearts the way that women do. I think now that what I was trying to get at was the idea that men are capable of being wholly and utterly selfish, that they will go to any lengths to achieve their ends, that other human beings can be nothing more than means, nothing more than tools, nothing more than objects. And I believed these things were not true of women because we women had these things called hearts. A heart, to me, was the capacity for empathy, the capacity to see the other person as a human being, to imagine others' humanness as fundamentally equivalent to one's own. No, even more, not just the capacity, but the necessity. Because we women had these heart things somewhere inside us, we couldn't not consider the humanity of others. We couldn't just dismiss people. We couldn't use them like tools. We must always, no matter our end goal, reckon with the other person as a person. Needless to say, I didn't trust any man farther than I could throw him. It didn't matter who the man was, stranger on the street or the preacher at my church. It didn't matter how old he was, a little boy or a creaky old gent. It didn't matter what he looked like, how well I knew him, how rich or poor he appeared to be, what his job was, whether or not he was smiling. All that mattered was that he had a Y chromosome, and that meant he was up to something. See, I knew back then that men were always trying to work things to their own advantage. Since I was a girl, later a woman, I was, of course, a prime target for leveraging. Men will certainly use other men if they have to, but a woman is much easier to use. She is both physically and socially weaker. Besides, most men assume that women are easier to manipulate. I just knew that men had to be manipulators and much better at it than women. It was likely encoded in their DNA. Men wouldn't bother with females unless they wanted something from them. And I don't just mean sex. That was the old stereotype, but of course there were lots of uses men put women to. In my suspicions, older men suffered more from the men are only after one thing truism. I remember being 9 and taking a walk with a visiting old family friend, wondering if he wanted to kidnap me and molest me. Or being 17 and being hugged by a man at church and wondering if he was just hugging me to touch me. In my mind, they were all guilty until proven innocent, all potential molesters or lechers. You couldn't start to trust them because that's what they wanted. They wanted to act like your friend and gain your trust so that they could violate it. I found it hard to relate to the boys my own age. I suspected them too of being perverts. Also, I was convinced they were only interested in me insofar as my brain might be useful to them. Could I help them with or do their homework? Could they cheat off me during a test? And if it turned out my brain would not be useful to them, then they would only be interested in discrediting my intelligence in order to build up their own egos. That was why I had to make sure to constantly keep them in a position of intellectual inferiority, just to convince them it wasn't worth having a go at me. I had lots of crushes, though, throughout my childhood and adolescence, and here was where a painful paradox came into play. No man was trustworthy, but there was one, whoever the current crush was, who somehow was perfect and wonderful. I couldn't understand how this was possible, yet that mysterious thing I called my heart declared it to be so, and I couldn't naysay my heart. The painful part was, of course, that I had far too much pride to ever admit to anyone that I could have feelings for a male person, that I could ever stoop to such a level. Of course, the main motivation for hiding my feelings was the certainty that I would be rejected. I wasn't exactly popular with boys. I wasn't the sort of girl one might call approachable. It took me a long time to escape this either-or dichotomy. Men were either soulless wretches or idealized visions. It took me a long time to understand that men were human, just like me. I had my first real conversation with my father when I was 20. We'd been left together in the car by my mother and sister, who were off frantically making last-minute preparations for my sister's wedding. Normally, I would have ignored his presence in the front seat and made do with the company of my own thoughts. This time, though, I felt suddenly compelled to strike up a conversation with him. Maybe I felt empowered by my newly acquired Spanish language skills. This conversation was in Spanish, you must understand. He laughed at my South American accent. "You sound like an Argentino," he scoffed. His voice, whether speaking Spanish or English, is always deliberate, casual, never in a hurry. Well, at least I'm finally speaking Spanish to you, I said. He laughed good humoredly, and we talked. We didn't talk about anything grand or important. I don't even remember what it was we talked about, but we talked. And he said insightful and fatherly things. Or perhaps for the first time, the things he said sounded insightful and fatherly. Perhaps it was that he said these things in Spanish, his native language, instead of English. It's not that my father does not speak English. On the contrary, his vocabulary is extensive, and his use of language can only be described as expressive. He never really bothered with grammar, though, and his accent is still so thick that sometimes I have to translate his English, even for my mother. She's been listening to him longer, but I had the advantage of learning my father's personal brand of English as a native language. I listened to my father speak this way, and while to me it is simply the sound of his voice, there is something different about it, something that makes it less worth listening to than other voices. I tell myself that I'm enlightened, that I'm culturally aware. I think that I don't judge people who are different from me. But still, there's some unintentionally absorbed assumption that insinuates itself into my perceptions, murmurs to me that someone who's been speaking a language for 20 some odd years without improving his accent one bit is simply not very intelligent. I hear his embarrassing jokes. He thinks Sunday and someday are the same words. When I say, we'll see, he responds in mock inquiry, we'll see? The double O sound isn't the subtle and complicated but that pure, deep Spanish ooh. These things tell me that I am better than he is. And without quite reaching down to pat him on the head, I still manage to assume an air of insufferable condescension. He's used to it. This sort of thing has been going on for years by the time I'm born, but it stings a little more to get this same condescension from his own daughter. But I've built up this myth about him being a lesser sort of human being. He's not to be treated with the same care and consideration as the rest. It's not just the language barrier, of course. There are cultural factors, too. Why is he so obsessed with the fact that he's the father? And there are all those wounds of family and loss and race accumulated beneath the surface of my skin, other wrongs I can debit from his account. These things, too, become part of the myth, which itself becomes a building block, a tile in a grand mosaic I was designing to explain my entire life. I came to understand in my late teens and early 20s that my polarized view of the male sex had created a paradox in my modus operandi. There was something strange about the way I behaved around men. The more I admired a man, the more impossible it was to even look him in the eye, much less speak to him. Yes, that was thunder. Like I said earlier, there's a storm rolling in. I know that it is not unheard of for people to get flustered and tongue-tied around people they're attracted to. The abnormal part was that the more I despised a man, the easier it was to talk to him. The only male persons I could get close to socially and emotionally were the ones I could sneer at. This is how I came to make my first real male friend. When I was 17, a junior in high school, I got my first job as a customer service representative slash carousel operator in my hometown's mall. When I began working there, all the employees were women. After I'd been there for several months and the usual turnover had happened, a guy was hired. BJ was my age, a senior in high school, fairly popular and fairly ambitionless. He was the child of a mixed race couple, like me, but unlike me, seemed to take his racial ambiguity in stride. I had his number within a few hours of meeting him. BJ liked cars and he liked sex. It wasn't hard to figure him out. I hadn't known him very long before he started dropping unsubtle hints that he wanted to introduce me to the backseat of his Mitsubishi. These offers were both disgusting and fascinating. BJ was exactly the kind of guy I couldn't stand, but I found myself looking forward to the shifts when I worked with him. On slow nights, we would sit in our kiosk in the center of the mall beneath the bright lights of the carousel and chat and joke for hours. I didn't understand it at first. Slowly, I came to realize that it was absolutely wonderful to be the object of male attention, even attentions as shallow as BJ's. Listen, BJ loved his Mitsubishi. Don't knock the Mitsubishi. BJ was easy to talk to because everything was already out in the open. His intentions were no secret, and so I could curl my lip at him and then get on with my life. He confirmed my negative view of men and therefore held no mystery, no puzzles to be solved. He was simple. I could talk to him about anything. Thus it was that because of his flaws, and not in spite of them, I was able to become friends with BJ. It is his actual real name, was BJ. I mean, obviously, like, he has a full name, not just letters, but he went by BJ. Of course, knowing BJ didn't magically transform me. There was no sudden realization, no epiphany as a result of my relationship with him. He was merely someone to talk to, and something of an ego boost. When we both graduated high school and went our separate ways, there was no reason to stay in touch. And I went off to college just as afraid of men as ever. Yeah, did not rename him. Actual name. In the end, the only thing that made men seem human to me was actually knowing some of them. Maybe it became easier to know them as I grew older and more self-assured in general. I met Jonathan, who probably cared more about his appearance than I did, and who certainly liked men more. I met Kevin, who thought he could win my heart by belittling me into submission. I met Kyle, who made my heart beat fast and my head grow light, and who turned me down for dates because he had a crush on a guy named Ian. I met Aaron, who looked me straight in the eye and talked to me like an equal and a friend. I met Andrew, who was more self-confident than almost anyone I knew and at the same time terrified of asking me out. I met Ron, who wanted me to believe I was beautiful. I met Josh, who was afraid to even touch a woman. Oh yeah, Kevin was quite a character. What I learned from knowing them was something that I could never have imagined. It wasn't merely that men had hearts, and that some women didn't. It was that, apart from biology, there was no one thing that definitively set men apart from women. Remember, guys, I wrote this many, many years ago. I met men who could easily be categorized as manly and men who were more or less androgynous, and also men who were clearly feminine. I learned there was a difference between sex and gender. I came to realize that what I despised was not men, but an idea of men that existed only in my mind. Of course, ideas don't merely materialize from thin air, they grow slowly over time. They are fed and nurtured by experience. They take root and blossom in the soil that is prepared for them. It is nighttime in the first car I ever owned, a white Toyota Corolla, 1992 model. Just a little bit, Laws, just a little bit. I'm driving out on the highway in the near empty countryside just outside Victoria, Texas. The car is full of darkness and silence. For some reason, my parents are riding in the back seat, with my father in the middle. I glance up from the road and have this thought. My father is just a dark shape in my rearview mirror. That is what I wished to believe when I was 18, finally escaping the tense standoff that had been my home life ever since my father returned. I had gotten on a highway that would lead me far from my family, and he would merely be the dust clouding the air behind me, the exhaust streaming from my tailpipe, an object disappearing from view with every inch that I moved forward. I thought that the act of leaving could move my father and all I felt about him into my past. But leaving home has a funny way of opening your mind to truths you could never before have accepted. I became a Spanish and International Studies double major in the fall of 2003, my first semester of college. At the time, I didn't care one way or another about Spanish or Latin America. I wanted to come to this particular school. I was fascinated by the study of languages, and Spanish was the only foreign language major available. I knew Spanish pretty well. I'd studied the Spanish tongue all the way back in elementary school, and had ended up taking 4 years of it in high school. I even tested out of 12 hours of it when I got to college. All in all, I felt I had a pretty good command of the language. Somehow, up until then, I had managed to avoid the practical application of my language skills at home. My first majors classes were in the fall of my sophomore year. I was really excited. This was going to be my study abroad semester, and I was going to spend it perfecting my knowledge of the Spanish language in Montevideo, Uruguay. Here's what happened, briefly. I got there. I discovered I knew a lot less than I thought I did. I learned a lot more than I'd ever expected I would. I came home unnerved, befuddled, and unsure of what had just happened to me. I remember my first day back in the United States. My mother and sister took me shoe shopping. The stores were huge. The retail places and their massive amounts of merchandise frightened and bewildered me. Worst of all around me, all I heard was English, English, English. I wanted to stop up my ears and shut out the irritating sound of it, my native language. We were in Ross, and I was wandering up and down the shoe aisles in a daze. Suddenly, a family of 6 passed by, all chatting loudly in extremely Mexican Spanish. Immediately, I relaxed. I breathed a sigh of relief. I wished I could follow them around the store for the rest of the day, drinking in their every word. For those first few days of re-entry, I was an evicted Latin American. I was forced to rub elbows with gringos. I was made to listen to nothing but their strange, harsh language that was all the worse for how easily its meanings penetrated my mind. I wanted to run away home, but I was already home. I was Jose Enrique Rolos Ariel, stuck in the world of Caliban, and I wanted out. For the first time in my life, I identified more with my father than with my mother. That moment of experiencing otherness was the beginning of understanding for me. My idea of men did not spontaneously form in a vacuum. Neither did my love of Latin American culture. No parent leaves his or her child untouched. None of us escapes childhood unscathed. We are each of us a wild tangle of the ideas planted by our mothers and our fathers, or by those who stood as mothers and fathers for us. Because of my father, I will always have ambivalent feelings toward men. Because of him, I will always find it easier to trust women. Yet, because of him, I'm able to see my own culture from a dual perspective. I'm able to sympathize with the plight of the other, the stranger in a strange land. When I was 18, I thought the best I could hope for was that my father would slowly disappear in my rearview mirror. 6 years on, I know that hope is unrealistic and short sighted. At 24, I can only hope that someday, when I have grown children of my own, they will forgive me my own shortcomings. There you go. There's the chapter about my father. Who needs a drink after that? Unfortunately, I left my cognac in the kitchen, so I can't have a drink right now. Yeah, I was still planning to have children then. Ebony, you too? You need a little something something to take the edge off. Yeah, there you go. It's 6:30. Wow. Well, considering that my student canceled, I don't have to rush off to tutoring, but I probably will go ahead and wrap it up now. Laws, you're right. My Toyota Corolla was not a sex car. Neither I nor anyone else that I know of ever had sex in that car. When you're in early 20s, you still think that you possibly want children as soon as possible. I mean, at that point, I wasn't thinking of having children as soon as possible, but I was still just kind of assuming that it would happen at some point in my life. Yes, Laws. I definitely agree with the sad for things that I didn't have context for yet. I'm glad that you felt that it was insightful. Um, I think it was a good insight into where I was at that point in my life. Obviously, that was 12 years ago now. So, I'd discovered a lot and taken on board a lot of new ideas at that point. But I've certainly had a lot of new experiences and learned many, many more things since then. You relate hard, Ebony? Is it the distrust of men for you? um, but yeah, it's hard to separate my feelings about my father from my feelings about my cultural background. um, which is how all of that stuff about like learning Spanish and studying abroad in Latin America and all of that ended up being mixed into that chapter. But I do remember when in some of my classes in college, we started learning more about like machismo in Latin American culture. Um, like I came to understand many things about my father that I had not understood before then. Colorism on your part didn't relate to dark men because you're so planning to marry a light skinned ambiguous. Ah, yeah, yeah. No, no, I know exactly what you mean, Ebony. Because it's like on one hand, I I understand that growing up in the United States, there's no way that I don't. I'm not full of internalized racism and colorism. Like it's just impossible to grow up in this country and not be affected by those kinds of ideas. Sorry, I'm just trying to be like slightly less shadowy for you guys. And so I'm constantly like trying to examine my reactions to people and my thoughts about people in terms of that, and like knowing that that I've been exposed to those ideas since birth and that they're deeply implanted in there. Um, but on the other hand, like I don't think I will ever be able to trust men who remind me of my father. Uh, and unfortunately, that is at least partially related to like their physical appearance. Like, um, you know, not necessarily just a skin color, but like just if anything about their physical, like their overall physical appearance reminds me of my father. There's just like this immediate uh wished or immediate like reaction of like distrust and this man is going to hurt me kind of feelings. um and it's really hard for me to separate like, okay, what part of this is like the racism and colorism that I grew up with, and what part of it is trauma from having a terrible father who just happens to be a different race. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I don't want to react to people in a way that is racist or colorist, but like I can't deny my trauma. That's just like it's just part of who I am. And so like I fight against it. I have to fight against it, but there's still, I think, for my entire life I will probably have this instinctive reaction of distrust um toward brown-skinned men specifically. Oh, ebony, ebony. Yes, exactly the same thing. Like, um, I definitely for my entire life have been like, I would never marry a man who's anything like my dad, who reminds me even a little bit of like of my dad. But yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I know my sister and I have both talked about that before about like how we're like, well, we're both really, really attracted to white men. I wonder what that's about. um, but yeah, yeah. It's a whole tangled mess. And it's getting to the point where like you can't even really see me. So I probably should just go. Just like a disembodied voice coming to you from the shadows. This is a great video. Yes. Um, thank you guys. Thank you for coming. And thank you for listening to that roller coaster of a reading. And sometimes there's thunder too. Yeah. If only there were more lightning, you could get some like really dramatic like flashes of my face. Um, but unfortunately, that's not happening. Shadow Rhys. Okay. Thank you guys for coming. Aw, Laws. Hey, I mean, if you have words later that you want to share, go for it. But, you don't have to say anything if you don't ever feel like you have the words to say the thoughts. I'm just glad that you were willing to listen. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Love you guys. Take care. Good night. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye. Bye bye.